Eastern Front, summer 1941. A German infantryman crouches over a dead Soviet soldier on the outskirts of Smolensk. The fighting has moved forward. He is supposed to be following it. Instead, he stops. The rifle lying beside the body is not the weapon he expected. He has seen Soviet rifles before. The Mosin-Nagant bolt action, a design from 1891, slow to reload, one round cycled by hand between each shot. He has learned to count the pause between Soviet shots and use it. This rifle has no bolt handle. He picks it up. It is lighter than he expected. The magazine is detachable and holds 10 rounds. The action is gas-operated. He works the charging handle once and a live round ejects cleanly. He looks at the rear sight, the muzzle brake, the clean lines of the stock. Then he does something that surprises even himself. He keeps it. He is not alone. All along the Eastern Front in the summer and autumn of 1941, German soldiers are picking up Soviet rifles from the battlefield and not putting them back down. Some are taking them back to their units. Some are requesting captured Soviet ammunition from supply depots so they can continue using them. The Wehrmacht, which has been fighting since 1939 and has never felt the need to use captured enemy small arms in any systematic way, begins issuing official designations for captured Soviet rifles and authorizing their use in frontline service. Selbstladgewehr 258 for the model of 1938, Selbstladgewehr 259 for the model of 1940. The self-loading rifles of the Soviet Union, the weapons that German soldiers considered worth keeping. The Germans had a name for the rifle. They called it the Tokarev. This is its story. The rifle that German soldiers were picking up off Soviet bodies in the summer of 1941 was the product of a design process that had taken Fedor Vasilievich Tokarev the better part of 30 years. Tokarev was born in 1871 in the village of Yegorlikskaya in southwest Russia, near Rostov, the son of a Cossack family. He was admitted to a military vocational school at age 17 and graduated 4 years later as a non-commissioned armourer. He spent his early career as a master gunsmith in the 12th Don Cossack Regiment, which meant he understood firearms not as theoretical objects but as tools that had to function in the hands of men who would not maintain them carefully, in conditions that would punish any design weakness under circumstances where failure meant death. In 1910, at age 39, he submitted his first significant design proposal to the Imperial Russian Army, a semi-automatic conversion of the Mosin-Nagant bolt-action rifle. The idea was straightforward. The Mosin-Nagant was accurate and reliable. It was also slow. A trained bolt-action rifleman could fire 15 rounds per minute if he was fast and had already loaded. In sustained combat, the realistic rate was lower. A semi-automatic version of the same rifle, firing the same cartridge from the same magazine, could theoretically double the infantryman's rate of fire without retraining him on a new weapon. The Imperial Army tested the conversion and shelved it. The war came. The revolution came. The Imperial Army became the Red Army. Tokarev survived the transition, which in the years of the purges was not something every military designer managed. He was appointed senior engineer at the Izhevsk arms plant in 1919 and then transferred to Tula in 1920. He was 50 years old when he effectively began his career as an independent designer. Over the following decade, he produced a light machine gun variant of the Maxim, a submachine gun prototype, and a semi-automatic pistol that became the standard sidearm of the Red Army under the designation TT-33. In 1938, after a competitive process that took most of the decade, his semi-automatic rifle design was accepted for production as the SVT-38. The designation stood for Samozaryadnaya Vintovka Tokareva, which translates directly as Tokarev self-loading rifle. Model of 1938. Production began at Tula Arsenal in July 1939. The plan was ambitious. 2 million rifles per year by 1942. The Mosin-Nagant would be phased out. The Red Army would be the first major military power to equip its infantry entirely with semi-automatic rifles. Then the Winter War happened. Between November 1939 and March 1940, the Soviet Union fought Finland. The war did not go as expected. The SVT-38 performed poorly in the extreme cold. The gas port fouled. The magazine, which was supposed to be detachable, fell out during use due to a poorly designed release catch. The rifle was accurate to 600 meters, but the action was sensitive to ammunition quality, and the Red Army's wartime production cartridges were not consistent. The rifle was pulled back. Tokarev was sent back to his drawing board with a list of complaints from the field and approximately 4 months to fix them. He fixed them. The SVT-40, accepted for production in April 1940, was shorter and lighter than its predecessor. The handguard was now a single piece of wood. The magazine release was folded and locked until deliberately operated. The muzzle brake was redesigned from 6 baffles to 2, which reduced the complexity and the weight, while still controlling the recoil sufficiently for accurate rapid fire. The gas system was adjustable, meaning a soldier in the field could regulate the amount of propellant gas driving the action to compensate for fouled ammunition or extreme cold or accumulated carbon fouling in the gas port. The charging handle was repositioned for easier one-handed operation. Production was ramped up quickly because the factories already had tooling experience from the 38. By the time Germany invaded the Soviet Union on June 22, 1941, approximately 1 million SVT-40s had been produced and distributed. The plan called for 1/3 of all Red Army rifles to be SVT-40s by the time the invasion began. In practice, the ratio was lower, but the rifle was in widespread frontline service. The first 6 months of the war after Operation Barbarossa were catastrophic for the Soviet Union. German forces advanced hundreds of kilometers in weeks. Entire Soviet armies were encircled and destroyed. The equipment losses were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of SVT-40s were captured, abandoned, or taken from dead Soviet soldiers. German infantrymen who picked them up and used them were making a rational decision. The standard German infantry rifle in 1941 was the Karabiner 98 Kurz, a bolt-action weapon that dated in its essential design to 1905. It was accurate, reliable, and well made. It was also a bolt action. Between each shot, the shooter had to manually cycle the bolt, which took approximately 1 second for a trained rifleman, and broke his sight picture. Against an opponent armed with a semi-automatic rifle, a German infantryman with a Karabiner 98 Kurz was at a fundamental mechanical disadvantage in close-range firefights. He fired 1 round and worked the bolt. His opponent fired again before the bolt cycle was complete. The Germans had recognized this problem before the war. They had attempted to develop their own semi-automatic infantry rifle. The Gewehr 41 was the result. It entered limited production in 1941 and was issued in small numbers. The field reports were not good. The gas system was complex and unreliable. The trigger mechanism was stiff. The rifle was difficult to disassemble and clean in field conditions. German soldiers who received them were not enthusiastic about the replacement for their bolt actions. Then the German Army's Ordnance Department got their hands on captured SVT-40s in quantity. They studied the gas operating mechanism. The SVT-40 used a short stroke piston positioned above the barrel. When the cartridge fired, propellant gas was tapped through a port in the barrel and drove the piston rearward a short distance. The piston struck the bolt carrier, which drove the bolt rearward against spring pressure, ejecting the spent case. The spring drove everything forward again, chambering the next round. The entire cycle took a fraction of a second. The adjustable gas regulator allowed the system to function across a wide range of conditions and ammunition types. It was mechanically elegant, and it worked. The Gewehr 43, which entered production in 1943 and became the standard German semi-automatic rifle for the remainder of the war, used a gas operating mechanism directly derived from the study of captured SVT-40s. German ordnance documents from this period acknowledge the debt explicitly. The weapon the German army spent years trying to develop and could not produce adequately. They eventually built by reverse engineering a Soviet design taken from men they had killed on the Eastern Front. If you're finding this examination of Soviet weapons engineering of interest, subscribing to the channel helps ensure you do not miss the next one. The Wehrmacht's official designation system for captured weapons used the suffix in brackets to indicate the country of origin. Soviet weapons received the suffix R. For Russian, the SVT-38 became Selbstladegewehr 258 in brackets R. The SVT-40 became Selbstladegewehr 259 in brackets R. Both were formally authorized for Wehrmacht service with instructions on their use, their maintenance requirements, and their ammunition specifications. German supply depots in occupied Soviet territory were ordered to collect and stockpile 7.62 by 54mm cartridges from captured Soviet stores, specifically to keep captured Tokarev rifles operational. The Finns were equally impressed. During the Winter War, Finnish forces captured approximately 2,700 SVT-38s. During the Continuation War of 1941 to 1944, they captured over 15,000 SVT-40s. The Finnish army kept them in active service until 1958, 17 years after the war ended. They were not using captured Soviet rifles because they had nothing better. Finland purchased replacement rifles from multiple sources during the post-war period. They kept the SVT-40s because they preferred them. Inside the Soviet Union, the rifle that enemy soldiers were keeping was being progressively sidelined. The reasons were not about the weapon itself, they were about the war. The German invasion in 1941 destroyed or disrupted most of the Soviet Union's primary manufacturing capacity. The Tula arms plant, where most SVT-40 production took place, was threatened by German forces who reached the outskirts of the city by November 1941. Production was evacuated east of the Ural Mountains. The disruption was enormous. In 1941, over 1 million SVT-40s had been produced. In 1942, the number fell to 264,000. By 1943, it had dropped further. The Soviet military made the production decision with the arithmetic of industrial warfare. The SVT-40 required more precision machining, more man-hours and more material than the Mosin Nagant. It cost approximately twice as much to produce. The Mosin Nagant was also a better rifle than its reputation suggests. It was accurate, reliable in conditions of extreme cold and dirt, and a soldier could be trained to use it adequately in weeks. The PP Schuff 41 submachine gun, which could be produced even faster from stamped steel components, was proving its value in the close quarters fighting of urban battlegrounds like Stalingrad. The calculations pointed clearly towards simpler weapons in larger numbers. This was not an admission that the SVT-40 was a bad rifle. It was an admission that the Soviet Union in 1942 could not afford to produce good rifles. They needed rifles. The soldier who most clearly demonstrated what the SVT-40 could do in the hands of someone trained to use it was not a general or an officer or a male soldier documented in official military histories. She was a 24-year-old student from Kiev who had been working at an arms factory and attending sniper school as a weekend activity before the war began. Lyudmila Mikhailovna Pavlichenko was born in 1916 in Belaya Serkov, south of Kiev. She moved to Kiev at 14, joined a local shooting club, worked at the Kiev Arsenal factory, and in 1937 enrolled at Kiev University to study history. When the German invasion began in June 1941, she was among the first volunteers in Odessa to enlist. The recruitment officer suggested she become a nurse. She showed him her marksmanship certificates. He sent her to the infantry. Her weapon of choice in her first engagements near Belayevka in August 1941 was an SVT-40 sniper variant fitted with a 3.5 times optical sight. Her first 2 kills were made with it. She used the semi-automatic action the way it was designed to be used, maintaining sight picture through rapid follow-up shots without cycling a bolt. The German sniper across from her had a bolt action. The difference mattered. Over the following 2.5 months during the siege of Odessa, she recorded 187 confirmed kills. When her unit was evacuated by sea to Sevastopol, she continued. By May 1942, she had been cited by the Southern Army Council for 257 kills and promoted to lieutenant. 36 of her confirmed kills were enemy snipers, men who had specifically been positioned and tasked with finding and killing her. None of them succeeded. The Germans knew her by name. By the time she reached 257 kills, they were broadcasting messages over loudspeakers at Sevastopol in an attempt to induce her to defect. The message, as she later described it, Lyudmila Pavlichenko, come over to us. We will give you plenty of chocolate and make you a German officer. When that failed, the tone changed. A later message told her that if they caught her, they would tear her into 309 pieces and scatter them to the winds. She described finding this announcement satisfying. It meant the enemy knew her score precisely. In June 1942, she was wounded by mortar shrapnel. The Soviet High Command declined to return her to the front. She was 25 years old with 309 confirmed kills, and they had decided she was more valuable as a symbol than as a sniper. She was sent to the United States, Canada, and Great Britain to advocate for a second front. In Chicago, speaking to a crowd of workers and trade unionists, she said, "I'm 25 years old, and I have killed 309 fascist invaders by now. Do not you think, gentlemen, that you have been hiding behind my back for too long?" There was a moment of silence. Then the crowd erupted. Woody Guthrie wrote a song about her. Eleanor Roosevelt became her friend. She was the first Soviet citizen received at the White House. The United States government gave her a Colt semi-automatic pistol as a gift. Canada gave her a Winchester rifle with a telescopic sight, now displayed at the Central Armed Forces Museum in Moscow. She used an SVT-40 to make her first kills. The weapon the German soldiers on the Eastern Front considered worth keeping. The SVT-40's production ended in January 1945. Approximately 1.6 million had been manufactured. It was replaced in Soviet service not by a better rifle, but by weapons that were easier to make and maintain in the conditions of a vast industrial war. The SKS carbine and then the AK-47 made it obsolete by the late 1940s. The Germans never forgot it. The Gewehr 43, the weapon the Wehrmacht finally fielded as an answer to the semi-automatic rifle problem that had confronted them since 1939, was built on principles taken directly from studying captured examples. 400,000 Gewehr 43s were produced between 1943 and 1945. It never reached production levels sufficient to equip the German infantry at scale. The Soviet weapon it was based on had been produced in numbers 16 times greater than that by the time its production ended. What is written in the German Ordnance Assessment of the SVT-40, conducted after sufficient numbers of captured examples had been analysed, is precise in its language. The assessment describes the gas operating mechanism as clearly superior to the G41. It describes the adjustable gas regulator as a design element that German engineers had not incorporated and should have. It describes the detachable box magazine as more practical under field conditions than the fixed magazine of the G41. German engineers who had spent years building a semi-automatic rifle they could not get to work reliably, studied a Soviet rifle they had taken from dead Soviet soldiers, and built a working version of what they had been trying to build all along. The infantryman near Smolensk who picked up the rifle and kept it understood something that took German ordnance engineers another 2 years to formally document. It was a better weapon than what he was carrying.